and welcome to The Straw Hat with Rabbi David Wolkenfeld and Rabbanit Goldie Guy. We are the official podcast of Anshe Shalom B'nai Israel Congregation, an Orthodox synagogue in the Lakeview neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois.
So we are recording on Monday, February 7th, which is the 6th of Adar, 6th of Adar Rishon. We can talk about the significance of that date later on. But it's a Monday after a very full weekend and a very full week. It was a weekend and Shabbos with lots of people in the shul after some weeks with very few people in the shul. Thank God the Omicron surge seems to be rapidly departing Chicago and more people are back in shul, which is always encouraging to see. And we had a kiddush and more kids programming and stuff, and it was just nice to see folks out and about and interacting with one another.
Yeah. And nice to have so many kids up on the bima for Adon Olam.
It's very nice to, yes, that's a very nice metric, right? The number of lollipops distributed each week is a very good metric of communal health and resilience. It's always nice to see. It was also a very emotionally intense Shabbat. We had a visitor, Pastor Donovan Price, who works on the South Side, is a street pastor, came to visit, and the genesis of that visit was his outreach to me in a sign of support and solidarity after the wave of anti-Semitic assaults and vandalism up north in West Dutchess Park over the weekend and into early last week. I think it was Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday. There were a spate of attacks in various Jewish institutions in West Dutchess Park. There was a school, the Beis Yaakov, and there were two shuls and
Kol Tuv.
A catering company, right, that were targeted. And I think each of the incidents in the scheme of things in the historical perspective is mild, but when so many events like that occur in such a short period of time in one neighborhood in our broader community, it's very, very frightening. And so we reached out. We had a prior relationship. We went to Springfield together, I think in 2017, 2018, I don't remember, to lobby for more state funding for security grants for religious institutions. So that's how we met. That's sort of the context in which we met. And we've been a little bit in touch over social media in the years since then. And so that was, so sort of looking for, I had been sort of open to and talking about, some sort of collaboration. And this was, he reached out, and that was in a very, very meaningful way. So he came to our shul, and after Kiddush, people gathered and he spoke, and he shared a little bit he expressed the solidarity that when Jews are under attack, he felt the need to stand with the Jewish community in a synagogue, right, to sort of put his body where our bodies are and show his support, and that he's standing with us. And then he shared about his work, and his work I found incredibly just poignant, gripping, tragic, what he does. He's I think he kind of invented.
When I spoke to him about it, he talked about it being his calling. I asked him what brought him into the work, and those are the words that he used, is that he felt called to do this work, ministering, pastoring to people on the scene of violent trauma on the South Side, but I guess throughout Chicago. It's very...
That's an interest. Yeah, I think that's you speak to rabbis about why they do what they do. They say, speak to Jewish educators why they do what they do. It's like, well, I have this passion for this, and here's my professional goals, and it speaks to certain types of Christian clergy. It's I was called to, like there's a.
We talk about calling too. I remember talking about it in Maharat, in Yeshivat Maharat, but it's so interesting that people's callings can be so wildly different, even within the same kind of career path. Some people are called to the hospital, some people are called to the synagogue, some people are called to Hillel work, and he's called to the street. He said, he shared that he didn't originate this form of pastoral support. It's a model that existed in England and that he, I guess, brought to Chicago, that he is notified within minutes of a shooting, and he is on the scene usually within 20 minutes of somebody being shot in Chicago. And so he's there praying alongside victims of violence. He's praying alongside grieving, surviving family members after victims of violence. He's mediating between cops and people who are
Yeah. So I think it's very holy work and very special work, and I told him that he came to us and showed his solidarity, and I think we have to show our solidarity with him and his community. I think that's part of what it means to be an urban Orthodox congregation. I've spoken about this here and there over the almost decade that I've lived here. I think it's important for our shul not to be a lifestyle shul. It's not. I think there's a little few. And there are synagogues in urban neighborhoods where you pass through on your way to like a life in the suburbs, and like if that's what people choose to do, like we're happy to be a Jewish resource for as many months or years that you happen to live here. But I think our shul can aspire to more than that, to actually make a difference in our neighborhood and in our community and in our city, that we take our urban setting and location as in a serious way, and that that's the genre of Orthodox shul that we can kind of exemplify as an urban Orthodox congregation. I think that means partnering with other people of goodwill and standing with them and partnering with them in doing good work in our city.
Right. It's also just heartening to see, right, that we're on Donovan Price's radar, right? He cares about what's happening in our community, and he's looking out and seeing not just what immediately faces him and what's going on in his community and the work that he's called to do, but he's also looking out and saying what's happening in other faith communities like ours.
Yeah.
And I think it's just
totally,
it's a call to say it's
yes.
mutual, right? We want to care. We want to also
yes.
know what's going on.
Yeah, that's actually a really important point. One of the ways that social media distorts your perception of the world is that there's an algorithm that's choosing what to show you based on your prior behavior, what it thinks is going to generate more profit for the social media platform by increased engagement. And so you tend to see things either that will like upset you a lot, or maybe you'll see things that you'll agree with a lot, that'll generate a lot of emotion and connection, but it's not an accurate scanning of what's happening in the world or what people are saying. And so this is very, very striking. When the synagogue was the hostages were taken in Texas, 3 weeks ago. Seems like 3 weeks, whatever it was, right? Last month, there was this, a lot of people I was interacting with and saw their response was, Jews are so alone, we're so isolated, nobody else is talking about this, Jews are talking about this, nobody else is talking about this, why aren't our Gentile, friends saying anything right now? And let's Beseder, that's a truth out there, that like Jews were feeling something that others weren't feeling, and that's I think partially natural. It's also partly problematic that we needed a little bit more solidarity. It's also true that there were a lot of really wonderful people who were saying and making statements and trying to demonstrate their solidarity with our community, but we didn't see it because we're just in our social media bubbles that we built ourselves, and so we don't always see it. So I think it's just we're not alone, and there are good people who feel our pain and stand with us when we're suffering, and that's remembered. I spoke about that Shabbos morning, that didn't happen in other periods of Jewish history. No Christian clergy ever visited my grandparents' shul in Nuremberg. Didn't happen. No Christian clergy went to the shuls in Kishinev, to show their solidarity. And since it happens here, that really does create potential for something much, much better to occur in the future.
Yes.
So we try to learn a little bit of Torah and say Kaddish Rabbanan between Mincha and Mariv at the shul. And over the years, there have been all sorts of topics that have been explored and learned together in that setting. And currently, I am teaching from a volume of Sheilot Teshuvot, halachic questions and answers by Ravin Rosensweig, who is he's probably younger than I am. He's certainly not much older than I am, but he's published a number of really impressive halachic books. It's a very humbling experience to read such a well-written book by someone who is not an elderly man, right? But is someone young. And I've interacted with him a few times in person. He's a really sweet person and a really good person. His most recent project is halacha and mental health, which is incredibly important, and he's publishing halachic essays on that topic and books on that topic, which he's trying to get published also in English translation. So he's somebody whose name I hope we'll all be hearing a lot more of in the coming months, in the coming years. Yeah,
if you don't follow him on Facebook, you should. He actually has published he publishes sometimes on that platform as well, and it's a good way to be able to. He makes himself very, very available to people who see that he is active in the realm of mental health and halacha, and he makes himself available as a resource.
Yes, correct. He uses Facebook in a very effective way to disseminate Torah and disseminate really compassionate halachic guidance, and I definitely, if you're on Facebook, he's somebody worth following to get you.
You can form your own relationship with him and to his Torah, and it's like readily available.
Yeah. So we have. That's not a topic that we've not been dealing with mental health. The 3 volumes of his.
That book just came out.
His first book is a 3-volume set of She'elut Teshuvah covering all 4 sections of Shulchan Aruch, and we've been spending a few weeks and a few minutes each day reading through a teshuvah that he responded to about a young man, a Bar Mitzvah kid who had mild dyslexia. This boy couldn't read Torah. Because of his dyslexia. He could, however, memorize the Torah portion. He could leyn by memory, but he couldn't leyn by reading. And the question is that permissible? Generally, you need to read the Torah reading from a Sefer Torah, and it's not valid if you don't. But is there room for leniency here? He goes through several different analyses, because we also have a tradition that the Kohen Gadol on Yom Kippur would read by heart from one of the sections of the Torah that he read, rather than make everyone around him wait to roll, the 2 different sections. So we have to. So what made that possible? What justified that leniency, and could that be relevant here? And there are a couple of different ideas I thought that are really kind of interesting. It seemed, one idea that he raises, which I thought was really, really interesting, is that perhaps this entire distinction between the written Torah that should be read from a scroll and the oral Torah that should be taught orally without being consigned to writing whatsoever. Each genre of Torah should be kept, written Torah and oral Torah should be kept separate. We know that distinction broke down because we know that the oral Torah was written down, right? That's famous turning point in Jewish history that Rabbi Nasi organized the Mishnah. He was worried the Torah would be forgotten, and then ultimately the oral Torah was written down. We encounter the Mishnah, the Talmud, the Midrashic traditions as books, right? They're printed.
That's the other topic I'm teaching in between Mincha Maariv is a written
right. Rabbanit Goldie's reading is teaching Mishnah. You're not teaching it by heart.
Not Balpeh.
Yeah, you're from a book, right? So we encounter both the written and the oral Torah. We encounter as in written form, and we understand the way that the Talmud understands that shift is that the oral Torah would be forgotten, or the concern was it would be forgotten. So, eight lasot, we do what's necessary under emergency circumstances to make sure the Torah survives. And Ravin Rosensweig says, well, if it's permissible to consign the oral Torah to writing, which we all concede happened thousands of years ago, maybe it's also permissible to consign the written Torah to oral recitation. Maybe you could read Torah Balpeh. So I thought it was a really creative idea. Ultimately, the point that he feels most, I think, relevant for the tshuva is that there are a number of Rishonim, a number of medieval commentaries who say that the concern from reading Torah by heart is that it will appear as though there's something wrong with the Sefer Torah. In general, we're really worried about doing something that makes it look as though there's a mistake or something, some pugum, some gam in the Sefer Torah. That's why generally, if the wrong Torah scroll gets brought out, we don't go back and put it away and get the right one. We roll it, right? Because if we don't want to make it appear as though there's something wrong with that Torah scroll. But here, no one's going to have that mistaken perception because everyone knows, it's a Bar Mitzvah boy. If he's just not good at laning, he's an experience. They'll think, okay, he's doing it this way because he's an experience as a laner. No one's going to think, this thing's wrong with his Torah scroll. Why is he looking up instead of down? And especially in this community where this kid and his family are members.
Right, or maybe they'll just actually know, right?
Yeah, they'll know him himself. He has dyslexia, and then yeah.
Right, this is the way that he needs to recite the Torah reading. They know he has dyslexia, and therefore there's no... Precisely.
And Ravin Rosensweig then concludes by saying that we should search for solutions to enable people to participate more. That is the job of halachic scholars and people in religious leadership positions, is to find ways to be inclusive, because laying for your Bar Mitzvah is, an important... thing that people do, right? To connect them to Jewish tradition and to the community and to mitzvot, and that's a good thing. We want to encourage that. And if all the other kids his age are doing it and he's not, that could be really painful for him, and we want to avoid that as much as possible. So there's substantial grappling with sources in this tshuva. He doesn't just say, it's not just let's be inclusive, yada yada yada. It's all fine, right? It's a very like serious reckoning with the relevant halachic sources and going back to the passage in the Talmud and as it's analyzed by the Rishonim, etc. But it's not he's not engaging in this scholarship, as a robot, as a neutral, right? There's a bias, and that bias is towards inclusion and compassion, and
there's always a bias in tshuva.
Well, I don't disagree with you. In fact, I agree with you. There's a bias in tshuva.
Right. That's what people. Right. That's why it's. Right. It's not a negative thing that you're stating. He has a goal, right, of more inclusivity. Right. It's a positive thing.
Yes, I agree, and I'm sorry if that wasn't clear. I absolutely agree, and that bias is important. I think it's nice that and helpful that he like shows his cards and shares the bias, because that's also teaching Torah. Like he's telling us these are the values. I mean, because somebody else could.
These are the values, and they're borne out by serious source analysis.
Right. So it's both parts. It's that the values is backed up by very, very rigorous and comprehensive. Doing the work. He does the work. He doesn't just like say the values. He does the work. Yeah. And by naming the values, he's also allowing us to, because somebody else could approach this and say, no, actually, in our congregation, like really meticulous laning is like a real value of our community. And maybe we pay a professional balkore, or, we don't let every Bar Mitzvah boy read his whole parsha because we have really high standards. That's how we show our love of Torah and we're cultivating the skill in our community. And you got to, they were like, that was, at, if I'm remembering correctly, at least years ago, they at Gush at the yeshiva they didn't allow like Shana Aleph guys to leyn.
Really?
Maybe like the end of your first year. If you were there for a year and you passed like the audition, maybe they would like add you to the rotation. But like that's compromising the inclusivity, but it's expressing other values. So I think there's something helpful in a posek showing his or her cards and saying, these are the values that were orienting me towards finding a solution to this situation. But again, you got to show the work. That's also really important. So we're on to another tshuva of his, and now we're learning about what happens if you need, also related to Torah reading, if you need to give an aliyah to two Levis, because there's a simcha, it's like a Levi, maybe somebody who's a Levi family is getting married, and so the father and the uncle all need aliyot, and maybe there's a yard site also the same Shabbos. So what do you do when you got to accommodate too many Levis? So how do you solve that problem? So that's a shorter tshuva, so we'll finish that. It won't take us so long to finish that, but that's what we're looking at now.
So it's interesting that you brought up a tshuva that talks about kind of the line between Torah shebichtav and Torah sheba'al peh, and putting formally written words into and saying it's okay that it can be ba'al peh sometimes, right? That Torah shebichtav might be able to be read aloud in certain circumstances by heart, and the other way around that you mentioned about when we had to write down the Torah sheba'al peh for the purpose of preserving our traditions, preserving our Torah. The teaching, one of the teachings that I've taught in my recent series on Rabbi Nachman, I think also talks about this line of between formalistic practice and praying out of a siddur, praying out of the set series of prayers that are dictated by our tradition, and the prayer that comes from the heart, and how those practices that the Ba'al Peh, the stuff that comes out of the heart, can really sit beside the prayer that's written and prescribed from the siddur in a very natural way. One of the Torot, one of the teachings of Rabbi Nachman that we explored in the first class was Torah 25 on hitbodedut, on the practice of meditation. I'm not sure if there's a better translation of hitboded. Comes from the root boded, badad, being alone, to seclude oneself, to find a quiet space, to quiet oneself, and to speak to God. And that spiritual practice described by Rabbi Nachman thinks that hitbodedut should be part of your spiritual toolbox as a Jew, right? You should daven 3 times a day from the siddur, as is prescribed, and also make a set time every week to talk to God in this manner of hitbodedut. So this is how Rabbi Nachman talks about what is this practice. He says, hitbodedut is the highest level, which means to set aside an hour or more, okay, to seclude oneself in a room or in a field, to express yourself in dialogue with your Creator, with claims, words of favor, to request and supplicate before God, that God should bring you close to God's service. And that you should pray, Rabbi Nachman says you should pray in your own language, he mentions German, but for us that would be in English. And he says because it's in Hebrew, it's really hard to express yourself. It's really hard to actually formulate what's going on in your heart before God. And you should speak what's in your heart, whether it's regrets or tshuva, wanting to repent and to make amends with God, to supplicate, to ask God, please bring me closer. And Rabbi Nachman says you should do this every day, not only once a week, but every day at a designated time, just like your davening practice, right, is at a certain time every single day. So too, you should do this hitbo to do it. And sometimes, says Rabbi Nachman, you won't have anything to say at all. And that silence is also prayer. There's the moments of silence that you stand before God without any words. And these are your own words, right, of what's on your mind. You just stand there and you become stuck. That silence is the prelude to prayer. Yeah. But in other ways, he says that it can also be translated into a cry, right? If you're silent and stuck and you say, I have nothing that I can actually ask God for, I have nothing that I can say, wow. I don't have the words, you should cry to God about the distance between where you are now and where you'd like to be, what you want now and what is a more perfect desire in service of God.
Does he share like a source for this? Did he make this up? Where does he derive this Jewish practice of spontaneous? Yeah.
There is a source that might back Rabbi Nachman up. In that particular Torah, it doesn't describe a source. It's not like Rabbi Nachman doesn't go and say Shene'emar, as it says in the pasuk. It's not as structured as that to say. And here's where the Torah says it. The Gemara teaches in Avodah Zarah, Daf Yomi Aleph on 5a, says that this is something Chazal taught about the verse. Who would give that they had such a heart as this always to fear me and keep all my commandments, that it might be good for them and with their children forever. And in a later stage, it says the Gemara, Moshe says to the Jewish people, you're kfuyei tova, right? You're not grateful for what God has offered you. When the Holy One, blessed be He, said to the Jewish people, who would give that they had a heart as is always, right? God says, I wish that Bnei Israel would align their desires with mine. I wish they would just be in line with what I wanted, with God's vision for the world, with a more perfect vision for being Jewish, right? For being servants of God. So when God said, Mi tain, who would give that Bnei Israel would have such a loyal heart, Bnei Israel should have said, okay, give us that heart, right? You want us to be in line with you. You want our hearts and our intentions to be aligned with yours, God. So, okay, show us how to do it. Make it so that it's true, right? And that's kind of an opening there in the Gemara of Chazal even saying, where there was room there where God said, I wish they were more in line with me. And we should have said, okay, make it happen. Make it so. I'm too far, right? I know there's a distance that pains me. God help me, right? That there's something there of opening up with your own words and saying, I recognize the distance here, right? That cry of saying, I'm not perfect, and here's my...
I have another question. Are there people who do this? Breslovers, I presumably do this, right? Anyone else? Do you know communities of practitioners who...
Do I know personal practitioners? So I could say, listen, when I first learned about this concept when I was studying in Migdalos, I had a Rabbi Nachman class, and there was also a Chassidut overview of Chassidut.
Who taught that? Do you remember?
Of course.
Okay.
These are my Rebbeim. This is where I go back to. By the way, there are lots of resources online. So one of my teacher, for Rabbi Nachman was Rabbi Don Hauser, who's a Gushnik who teaches Chassidut. It's he's in with all the Gushniks, and he teaches Chassidut and Gemara, right? Yeah. He's also he's a Gushnik, but he's got this heart and this voice, and he's the most gentle person you'll ever meet. Wonderful. Once I was at his house for Shabbat, and his kiddush was about 15 minutes long, but it was the sweetest poem I've ever heard in the world.
Yeah. Wow.
Right. So there are people in the world practicing this, but in those classes, right, we were encouraged to experiment.
Yeah.
And I've seen that with other Jewish meditation teachers or teachers of Chassidut. I had a class also with Rabbi Dr. Aviezer Cohen at Migdalos, who taught, it was more of an overview course, but as part of those classes, we practiced. I had another teacher who also encouraged us to practice as part of our, I would go out, we would find places to seclude ourselves on campus. We'd have to find a place where we knew no one would be passing by, and it would be nighttime, and then we'd all go into our corners and practice talking to God. And the reason that I wanted to teach this as part of my Rabbi Nachman classes is because it's a spiritual practice that's really stayed with me. It's really changed the way that I relate to God.
You're bearing the lead, so you are a community of you are a practitioner.
I'd say right. There are practitioners where you find them. That's the community. It's not they're all in one place. It's
all right, but you are amongst them.
I mean, it opened up my sikha with God for the rest of my life. That I could just speak to God as if God was my companion, as if God was a constant presence, and sometimes that can be more powerful than set tefillah as well, right? I'd say I emphasize that Rabbi Nachman would say it's part of your toolkit. I don't know if you use those words, but right, it goes alongside, it complements, right, the Torah Shebechtav of the Siddur itself, is that you learn how to actually be in conversation with God all the time, and that you walk with God. So I do try to practice this. I don't have a set practice of once a day, once a week. It's more of a way of walking around in the world. So that's why I taught that, and other classes also come from teachings, right? Having only 3 classes on Rabbi Nachman is not very much. There's a lot of Torah out there of Rabbi Nachman, so I'd be happy to learn with anyone who'd like to explore more, but all the topics are ones that really resonate with me personally, and things that I've taken from those and carried with me in my worldview.
So and just to clarify, I guess this last of the 3 Rabbi Nachman classes is this Wednesday.
Yes.
And
so
somebody who missed the first 2,
there are recordings.
They can watch them
on
the shul's
YouTube
YouTube channel, but do they have to watch them before they come to
No, they do not. So the first one was on Hit Bodedut, this practice of talking to God. The second one was on Nigun, which again is a very broad topic in Rabbi Nachman of melody and the power of melody and bringing together worlds and opening doors to conversation with people, with God. A similar thing, right? And where melodies come from, how we source the melody, right? It's all really interesting. I actually made it when I was I was a religion major in undergrad, and I took a class in comparative mysticism, and there were lots of other mystics in the world who talked about there being music of the world that we had to attune ourselves to be in line with the universe, to create harmony, to bring order to the world. And so it's that's also something that draws me to it. It feels very human. It feels very human. It's Jewish language for it. Rabbi Nachman, right, certainly was not. He has a lot of followers now, right? But he wasn't. Chassidut in general was seen as like a revolution, something that was upending the order of things. Like I said, because it was taking like what was normal and like here's tefillah and we have a set order and we know what we're supposed to do. And you're telling me to do something different. You're telling me there are deeper ways to reach God. What does that mean? And why are you trying to ruin everything for everybody else? They didn't say it in that exact manner. But there was a lot of pushback because it's pretty revolutionary to say you can turn to speak to God in whatever language you choose. But that's what's so powerful about it. Amazing. So the third class, I haven't settled on a topic exactly.
Oh.
Yeah. I left it open to my students. I said, please tell me what you're interested in learning. He talks about dance and the power of movement and dynamics of dancing as a metaphor for life and the energies of life and our dynamics with other people. That might be the topic, but there's lots to explore.
When are you going to decide?
How am I going to? There's so much out there.
Well, everyone is all the listeners.
There's so much out there.
All the listeners are welcome to join you in live Wednesday evening. And or to listen to the recordings of the classes on
and
the
to
YouTube
weigh
channel.
in before
weigh
Wednesday.
In, well,
to let me know.
They may not hear this podcast.
There'll
be very little time. Hopefully, they'll decide before
hopefully
they hear.
I will.
By the time this podcast is released, you'll have a topic.
I'll have a topic, but maybe I'll intuit what the people want.
maybe. I hope so.
No, lots of people have been coming to this.
That's
It's
great.
I'm just. It's very interesting to me to see people drawn to this.
Isn't it?
Yeah. I didn't know that I could share. So
great.
I'd love to share this with more people.
Wonderful. Great. In Daf Yomi, we're in Purim Katan, which has like 2 major topics. One is Chol HaMoed, the intermediate days of the festivals, and the other is mourning, and so those are the 2 topics of Masechet Purim Katan, the main topics, and sometimes they coincide. How do you mourn on Chol HaMoed, right?
Yes.
So what are today we've been dealing most detailed with the mitzvah of kriah, of tearing a garment in response to someone dying. You and I spoke a little bit about the symbolism of that mitzvah and what it demonstrates. Yeah, I guess I sort of inspired by the daf to make an editorial comment that God forbid, after 120 years, when somebody dies and you have the obligation of mourning, that you should do the mitzvah of kriah. It's like it's worth it's worth tearing a jacket, tearing a shirt.
Yeah.
To do the mitzvah right and to express something really real that's you've actually suffered a real loss. Like we say it as a metaphor, suffering a loss. It's almost like it's like a euphemism, suffering a loss. Like someone died, okay?
Yeah.
And the loss of your shirt is actually a pretty small thing in the context of losing a loved one, of the death of a loved one. And I think
I thought it was also a channeling of like a destructive impulse after experiencing the death of a loved one.
Yeah, Gemara in Shabbos talks about that, right? About
right, containing your mourning, right? And also Purim Katan talks about it. It was in the 20s somewhere, right? Of like you're not allowed to mourn more than is necessary. You're not allowed to like luxuriate in the sadness and the deep, intense feelings of the grief. And so I think our mourning practices give a container for it and says, here's a way to express it. And this is like the destructive impulse of I'd like to smash the world into smithereens now that I don't have
or
or
myself, right? The Torah explicitly says you're not allowed to make gashes in your body as an act of mourning, which is expressing somehow that like I am less, my life is diminished, like my own body,
grief.
right?
It's
and
grief.
And the Torah says no. You have like it's
this isn't right. So this is like a sanctioned way of expressing that kind of destructive impulse, of like self-destructive impulse.
Sanctioned, but within bounds, right? That
exactly.
It's worth
exactly.
It's So I it's very common.
It's very visceral.
It's common in like sort of less orthodox circles for people just to tear a ribbon, which they pin to their shirt, which I guess is sort of evoking the kriah. But I think there's something that you deny yourself by not tearing the garment. It's like the loss. It's more than just a torn ribbon. Like the loss that you endured with the death of a loved one.
It's a tear over your heart.
Is a tear. Yeah. It's a real. It's more substantial than that, and I think people should. But yeah, separate from the mitzvah, people should do mitzvah, but Jews should do mitzvah. But also, I think there's a lot of psychological wisdom in all the mitzvah of mourning, and I feel not like I feel in. It's not about being like judging other people. It's about just compassion for people who are denying from themselves the resources that Jewish tradition provides to help people mourn in a very psychologically astute way.
Right, to really express the grief in a very visceral way.
And then gradually in stages to overcome that, right? So it's. I remember once hearing from Rabbi Weinreb, who was he was the executive director of the OU for many years, or summer years, and before that, for even more years, he was a congregational rabbi in Baltimore, and he also has training as a psychologist. So often his Torah teachings has a lot of psychological insight. He wrote a book actually on like little essays on the Parsha, with a psychological like kind of angle, and so I once heard him share a story of an occasion when somebody in his Orthodox shul had siblings who were not Orthodox, and they were all going to be sitting Shiva together, and they were going to be observing Shiva in a more sort of Orthodox kind of vibe, right? Meaning the mourners would be sitting, and people would be quiet, and they would come in and not speak until the mourners spoke, and they would ask questions about this, right? Whereas in like sort of broader Jewish community, a Shiva home can sometimes like have a ambiance of like a cocktail party, there's like refreshments and there's catering, and there's
that might be different also from Ashkenaz to Sephardic homes.
That's interesting. I don't think this was a Sephardic
but like
setting.
In Sephardic homes, there's like a lot of like food, and there's a lot of
So he convened the family before and said like this is it's gonna be a little different from what you might expect. This is how it's gonna be, and after the Shiva, the family had a chance to speak to him again. They were incredibly appreciative of having been given the space to actually be sad and to have a somber ambiance in the Beit Avel in the Shiva home. So I think throughout Avelut there's a lot of psychological wisdom and realism that sort of American culture pushes, like get over it and hide it.
It's also because it developed as mostly minhagim, right? That it's not. It came from a like deep human resources and human wisdom that accrued over time.
So we are approaching Purim Katan, the minor Purim of Adar Rishon. So what is Purim Katan, and how are we going to celebrate Purim Katan? Are we going to celebrate Purim Katan?
Don't say tachanu.
Don't say that. That's okay. That's cause for celebration for some people. Okay, okay. So it's like the minorest of minor holidays. It's not even a holiday. It's an echo of a holiday.
Yes,
I would say, right? We have 2 Adars this year. It's a leap year, a pregnant year. We added extra months to keep our calendar in order. You can, you can do the math. You can do the arithmetic. It all comes out right there. Takes 365 and a quarter days for the Earth to go around the sun. It takes only
math,
354 days for there to be 12 lunar months. And so we got to throw in 7 out of every 19 years, an extra month, and then they all adds up. And I have not done this arithmetic myself, but
it works.
It does work, yes.
Yeah.
It does indeed work. So we celebrate Purim. Why do we celebrate Purim? I know this is like a, sort of a classic topic for... explication and speeches and sermons. Why do we celebrate Purim in the second Adar, not instead of the first Adar? Gemara says we should link Purim to Pesach, and I don't know. I'm reluctant to say more now because I feel like this. We can talk about the next 6 weeks we can talk about this. Like why say
why do we need to link together the 2 redemptions, right? Go from the feelings of the redemption that happened in Shushan to the local redemption of Shushan, I guess, right? To the more global or national redemption of Pesach.
Oh, yeah. Purim was pretty, I don't know, I think the impression in the Gillah is that the Jews everywhere in the empire were in danger.
I suppose that's true.
Or many places, let's say many places they were in danger, but although the Ramban said, right, it's the Ramban and the Ran say that it was, I think it's the Ramban quoted by the Ran say that it was not the Jews in Eretz Yisrael, right, because they had the ability to defend themselves more.
I mean, it was a vast empire, but I have to imagine there are other Jewish communities at the time.
Yeah.
But that it became the national Purim.
But it was an incomplete redemption. That's the piece that I think is it was an incomplete redemption. Right? The end of the story is...
Akate Avdei Achashverosh Anan. We're still servants under Achashverosh.
As it were.
As it were.
Yeah, we're still... Yeah, the story ends, we're still victims of a capricious king, and we're subject to his whims, and later Jewish history shows what that means and what that can look like. So it's a lesser redemption than Pesach, and so we want to link them because I guess we're linking them because we're highlighting the fact it's a lesser redemption. We can't fully invest in this celebration without reminding ourselves that greater redemption
still in exile.
Is possible and hoped for, and that's sort of part of the
We thank God for the miracles and have to actually stop and acknowledge them, but also we keep praying for the rebuilding of Jerusalem.
Yeah, so. and yet I heard Rabbi Riskin say this a long time ago that that's why we the drunkenness on Purim is that that's an expression of kind of the sadness of the holiday. There's something tragic about the holiday that we end up still servants of Achashverosh. That the only thing that saves us from total assimilation is anti-Semitism, right? You have a totally Mordechai and Esther with non-Jewish names, 4th generation immigrants, totally assimilated at the party of Achashverosh, eating the non-kosher food, right? And it's only anti-Semitism that can save us from total assimilation, and that the redemption isn't so full, and so we'll celebrate, but we'll have to drink a little bit to celebrate because there's something really tragic about the whole episode is kind of tragic. So it's connected to Pesach, right? That's just a happier kind of story. On the other hand, Purim is a much more it's a more relevant kind of redemption story for us, right?
It's the one we still live of the smaller redemptions that we recognize.
Searching
all the
for
time.
God, searching for God in
the darkness,
without the open miracles.
Yeah.
So it's.
Right.
So Purim Katan, though, right? That first Adar, it's nothing. It's not a holiday, okay? It's not a holiday. It's telling us Purim comes in a month, and we don't say Tachanun.
And don't say Tachanun.
We don't say Tachanun. Okay?
And maybe you can eat a Hamentashen.
You have a Hamentashen. Yeah.
You don't have to.
Don't have to. You never have to.
It's not like matzah.
You never have to. You never have to eat. Eating matzah is also not an obligation. Yeah. Rav Soloveitchik he felt that the days that are derivative, like Purim Katan, that you omit Tachanun on those days, you don't omit Tachanun on the day before, right? On Shabbos, you don't say Tachanun on Shabbos.
On the Mincha beforehand. Mm-hmm.
You also don't say Shabbos Friday Mincha because it's the day before. So Rosh Chodesh, we don't say Tachanun. We don't say Tachanun on the Mincha before Rosh Chodesh because that's a day those are days that have
inherent significance.
Correct, inherent kedusha, the sanctity of the day. Purim Katan has no inherent sanctity. It's a shadow of something like that. Preface, whatever. It's a derivative sanctity. It's not. it's not its own day with its own sanctity, its own identity, and so there is no skip tachanun on the mincha before. So other days like that, Pesach Sheni would be a similar day like that, and you can think through whether other examples of that and whether his theory fits the evidence, but that was a theory that he promulgated.
Yeah, I've never heard the connection, going back to one topic ago, between the drunkenness of the Suda and the Hester Panim, hiddenness of God element of the holiday, the aspect of the holiday. I'd never heard that.
Rabbi Riskins shared that he felt that the difference between, like Judaism condemns drunkenness in pretty strong terms, and
also
yet,
live sume doesn't have to mean to get drunk.
Okay, fine. We assume it does, whatever. But Judaism condemns drunkenness. He felt the difference between drunkenness versus a more like celebratory and Jewish form of alcohol consumption is whether you're drinking to express joy, like Kiddush on Arba Koso, the 4 cups on Pesach, or if you're drinking to kind of like cover up sadness. And that's a more, he felt that was like the kind of, that's the drunk. No matter how much, like that's like the type of more problematic, self-medication type of alcohol consumption, which is like kind of inherently problematic, and we would limit, other than on Purim. Whereas Arba Koso and Pesach, that's like we're joyous, we're free, we're liberated, we're the 4 cups lubricate that liberation, and that's those songs of Hallel. Purim, there is no Hallel on Purim, right? And the drinking is to like kind of allow us to enjoy ourselves when fundamentally the story has like a kind of a tragic story.
No, I've looked into the topic of like where wine is incorporated into Jewish ritual and what the connections are between the two. I don't have a formal like a final thesis on it. Okay. But the one other aspect that I'm thinking of when we bring in wine to kind of numb feelings is when we bring someone to execution by the Beit Din. Yeah.
Did not know that.
Yeah.
Don't know that. Huh.
It's So I'm trying to find like a source for that in the.
All right.
It doesn't fit with everything else that we do, like but it's.
That's really have to be barla mita yafa.
Sure, right. It may be compassionate, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
To think of halacha actually saying, we recognize that wine can be used to numb feelings.
Yeah. Yeah. Right. Exactly. I mean, the other in the Torah, Noach drinking wine, right? That's also right.
That's also fairly negatively,
right? But what was he doing? He was recreating Gan Eden, maybe, right? So he's trying to
in the literary read of our modern scholars.
Yeah, in the literary read of our, he
was probably overwhelmed by the destruction of the world in the way that
plants a garden, okay? Right? Just like he's refounding humanity. He's making a new Garden of Eden, and maybe grapes was the fruit in the Eitz Hadat. So, but that fruit gave knowledge. His fruit took away knowledge and took away discernment, right? So
so that's also the dual aspect of wine, is that it both gives and takes away. Right? It's so interesting.
Right? That's the Gemara also Nix Nasiai and Yatzei Sod, right? That's
yes, but it establishes memory for us on Shabbat, right? It's Zachorim on Shabbat L'Kadasho is saying Zachorim al Yain. You have to remember it on wine, but it also erases our memory. Mm-hmm. That's kind of like what we're talking about of like numbing those emotions. So I never figured out what to make of all of it, but there's like real deep stuff there of Chazal's relationship to wine.
Oh, very neat. All right, we'll have to return to this topic.
I have a paper. It's like 3/4 written.
Okay, I'm looking forward to reading it then. We'll talk about it. We'll talk about it in a future episode. Amazing. Okay, thank you.